Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm Jon Macri, and I am joined, as always, by the great Nic Bodiford. Nic, it's, I guess, Bipocalypse Part 2 this week in the final week before the fantasy football playoffs. So, going to be a stressful week for a lot of managers looking to win and get in. So, we're going to do our best to provide some player insight and help them win their week with these crucial lineup decisions. So, how you doing? Did you have a good Thanksgiving?
Yeah, Thanksgiving was fine. It was Thanksgiving, and
Nice.
The buy stuff, man. The NFL does they make such a big deal about like their brilliant algorithm for scheduling and everything, and then they're like, it's like, so what's the reveal? 12 buys late in the year. It's so dumb. But anyway, here we are, and we're going to talk about Sincere McCormick.
Yeah, man. We're gonna Sincere is a legitimate option this week, so we'll definitely talk about him. Yeah, it's obviously brutal timing for the fantasy schedule, right? Like, at least it didn't happen in the fantasy playoffs, but like the week before, it's a lot of like do or die for a lot of teams. It's basically the fantasy playoffs, so it'll be interesting. We'll see what happens here, but yeah, as usual, we'll do our usual start sit bit here, go through QB streamers, defense special team streamers, wide receiver cornerback matchups, man zone data, players from Nate's start sit article, all that kind of stuff. And you could check out all the article versions of that over on pff.com with a PFF Plus subscription. But yeah, let's get right into it, Nic. We'll start with our QB streamers of the week. And the first name up here is Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears. What do you like about Caleb this week?
So this will be one that folks want to make sure they follow injury reports for San Francisco 49ers. This is a badly banged up unit. Over the last couple of weeks, they've been without two of their starting four defensive linemen, including, of course, Nick Bosa, who I think we've talked about on here, is not only dealing with a hip injury, but also strained both obliques, which, you know, good luck to you, bud. But they've also had some, we've got a linebacker who's playing through a fractured ankle. They've got some stuff going on in the secondary too. So this unit that used to be one that you would really want to avoid in recent weeks has been a lot more friendly. And the way that Chicago's playing under interim head coach Thomas Brown, among NFL teams in weeks 11 through 13, Chicago ranks 5th in pass play rate, 12th in expected points at EPA per play, and ties for 9th in explosive pass plays. And I use that window because Brown, I think, was elevated to the OC gig for 2 weeks before taking over as the team leader there. Meanwhile, Caleb Williams has taken the most dropbacks in the league during that time, 155. He's 11th in big time throw rate, 5th in big time throws. He is also showing very usable rushing floor, highest graded rushing quarterback. He is 5th in rushing attempts, 2nd in yards per rushing attempt, 2nd in first down and or touchdown conversion rate, 1st in explosive run plays. He's really putting it all together. It's a treat to see. Meanwhile, San Francisco mentioned their injury issues over the last couple of weeks. They rank 30th in EPA allowed per pass play, ties for 16th in yards allowed per coverage snap, 19th in explosive pass plays allowed rate, 18th in quarterback pressure rate, et cetera, et cetera. It's a good matchup for a young quarterback who is proving why he was the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, it's definitely nice. And it does feel like Nick Bosa probably going to miss again this week. It doesn't seem, at least the 49ers don't seem overly optimistic. I haven't seen the Thursday practice report, but I mean, that makes a big difference, right? Like, especially for a quarterback, like you said, dropping back so often now, and for a quarterback that also is prone to taking a lot of sacks this season. So you take the best pass rusher out of the equation there, that makes a big difference. And like you said, yeah, Fred Warner, not fully healthy either. He was coming in and out of the game last week, clearly dealing with that ankle injury and things like that. And his level of play has kind of gone down a little bit because of that as well. So I like the call here of Caleb Williams. And I like this next one as well. Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans going against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Nic, what made you put Will Levis on the list this week?
This is very much a trust the process one, because starting Will Levis in week 14 is very unsettling. But given what he's been doing since the shoulder injury, since he returned from the shoulder injury. I think that we can feel okay about it. One curious thing is that he was running the ball really well, and I highlighted that in the pass run funnel report last week, and then he went out there and totaled -3 rushing yards. I think he still had a usable passing stat line. But speaking of, among NFL quarterbacks, 37 NFL quarterbacks with at least 25 dropbacks in weeks 10 through 13. Levis is second in big-time throw rate and big-time throws, sixth in average depth of target, fifth in yards per passing attempts, and he's 16th in average time to throw, which for maybe a slow processor like him isn't so bad. So I'm heartened by this. The Jags, meanwhile, they're facing Tennessee Titans facing the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's an absolute dumpster fire. It's kind of one of those where you're like, how did you guys stick with this leadership for so long? Maybe they're doing it to try to go get the first pick, but over the last 4 weeks, Jacksonville ranks dead last in EPA per play, 27th in yards allowed per coverage snap, and in explosive pass plays allowed rate. I think the Titans offense is just going to kind of truck stick them, especially through the air. I think Tony Pollard still does his thing on the ground, but I expect Will Levis to really let it rip here.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, right? Like you said, he's actually been playing pretty well. Like I know they got blown out last week against the Commanders, but that was not really his fault either, right? Like he played pretty good in that game. I think I feel like we talked about it on the waiver wire show. I could look it up, but I'm pretty sure he had 5 big time throws in that game, and that is like a career high for him. So it was a really strong game from him. And then going against this Jaguars team, I mean, the Jaguars are giving up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So just kind of giving a little bit more confidence there in Will Levis. So I'm with you. And then I also included Baker Mayfield here of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Baker's he's been locked in as a starter, but it was a down week in week 13 for him. I really like his opportunity to kind of bounce back here in week 14, going against the Las Vegas Raiders. They're allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, but also considering an advantage in the trenches as well, because Mayfield should be able to thrive as a quarterback who has thrown a higher percentage of yards from a clean pocket at 87% than any other quarterback with at least 200 dropbacks this season. He's also thrown 25 touchdown passes on the year. That's the 3rd most from a clean pocket. And it accounts for 96% of his, 25 touchdown passes is 3rd most on the year. 96% of those touchdown passes have come from a clean pocket, and that mark leads the league as well. The reason that that's important going against the Raiders, Tampa's offensive line ranks 3rd in pass blocking grade. They've allowed the 2nd lowest pressure rate on the season, and they are facing the Raiders, who outside of Max Crosby do not have a viable pass rush threat. They rank just 25th in pass rush grade, 29th in total pressure rate. So I like Baker Mayfield back in play as a top 8 quarterback this week.
Yeah, only thing to note there, and I really liked it, that he's going to be able to throw from a clean pocket. He did get really banged up on one play last week where his knee kind of got torqued, and then Jadeveon Clowney accidentally stomped on his Achilles. I think he's going to be fine, but I think it's really nice that he's going to be able to throw from a clean pocket. One thing or two other things to monitor. Bucky Irving, I think he'll be okay. I think he'll play, but got hurt on a kick return. It was a dumb kick return. Todd Bowles got to knock that stuff off. Mike Evans, though, did add a calf injury to his injury repertoire, so he's now listed with a hamstring and a calf. Did not play or did not practice on Wednesday.
Right.
I don't think that they need him for this one, but maybe I'm not taking the Raiders seriously enough. Anyway, just for the listener, monitor it. If he's out there, I think that they can play really efficiently, and Baker can just kind of do his thing. But things to note, I like the matchup. I like the matchup a lot. No issues with that. Yeah,
for sure. And yeah, that's definitely, obviously ideally we would have Mike Evans and Bucky Irving in the lineup there. I did see that they were DNP here on Wednesday. So yeah, we'll see what happens the rest of the week, obviously. But yeah, I still like Baker quite a bit. I would still probably, even if those guys aren't playing, probably still inside the top 12 for me this week, just because of the matchup. Okay. And then I did have one sit. Again, it's going to be harder to call guys sits in a week like this where options are limited, but I put Jameis Winston of the Cleveland Browns. So Jameis obviously had a monster game last week, nearly 500 yards passing, finished as the overall QB1 for the week in standard scoring. but he does stand out as a little bit of a letdown candidate for those kind of adding him off waivers and plugging him in during this bye week heavy week here. And because he's going against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and when pressured this season, Winston has thrown just 18.2% of his total touchdown passes. That ranks 29th among 34 qualifying quarterbacks. He also ranks 29th among the same qualifying quarterbacks in that just 17% of his total completions have come under pressure. And then his overall 44.4% completion rate when pressured ranks tied for 30th among 41 qualifying quarterbacks. And again, the reason that this is important is the Browns' offensive line has been poor this season. They rank 29th in pass blocking grade, and they've allowed the 5th highest pressure rate. They're going against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Their defensive line owns the highest pass rush grade on the season with a 90.7. TJ Watt, Nick Herbig, those guys are clicking at a high rate here, and they are expected to have Alex Highsmith back as well, which, I mean, that is just a trio of deadly pass rushers against a really poor offensive line. Steelers are also allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks this season. So I probably would have Jameis outside the top 15 quarterbacks this week.
No notes.
All right, let's go to the wide receivers then, and we'll look at the wide receiver cornerback matchup article, Nick, and let's start with your starts from that article. What do you like about Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans this week?
So I'm going to kind of draw somewhat on I already touched on how the Jacksonville Jaguars have systemic issues that I think this whole passing game can exploit. Ridley, over the last 5 weeks since they traded away DeAndre Hopkins in week 8. He's been on a tear, but maybe not to the extent of his teammate in Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, and we can come back to him here. But Calvin Ridley, I think that he's going to face Ronald Darby on at least a plurality of snaps. They line up Darby, I think, mostly sticking to one side. Yeah, on the defensive left side, 85.4% rate. Ridley lining up on the offensive right, 44.2%. Ridley will get a shot at all of the Jaguars' cornerbacks. So I do make a point to discuss this in the article. Jacksonville's wide receiver coverage unit has the 6th highest explosive pass play rate, 4th highest catch rate, 3rd most yards per coverage snap, et cetera, et cetera. As for Darby, though, ranks outside the top 50. This is among 66 perimeter cornerbacks with at least 200 perimeter coverage snaps. Darby ranks outside the top 50 in targeted rate, catch rate allowed, and ranks outside the top 60 in yards allowed per coverage snap and explosive pass plays allowed rate. Grades out as the 48th best player, 61.9 PFF perimeter coverage grade. He's having it down here. He's, a 10, 12-year veteran or whatever, but it's been a little bit rough. As for Ridley, since Hopkins was traded away weeks 13 through 15, Ridley ranks 15th in yards per out run, 2.73, ties for 7th in explosive pass plays, and number 1 overall in average depth of target, 17.3. I think touchdowns are a volatile statistic. We tend to rely more so on yards. But I think he has a pretty good shot at housing 1 or 2 of these long balls. And not to forget, this is a revenge game for him facing his former team. I think that Ridley has a very good day here.
Yeah, no, of course. Love the revenge game narrative. I highlighted him in the Man Zone report as well, because the Jaguars play man coverage at one of the highest rates in the NFL, but they're a bottom 2 man coverage defense in completion rate allowed, defensive success rate, yards allowed per coverage snap. They're not good. Calvin Ridley, at least the clear leader in terms of target rate on the Titans, 28% versus man coverage, and he ranks 31st among 125 qualifying wide receivers in fantasy points per route run against man this season. So I'm with you. I'm all in on the Calvin Ridley revenge game this week. I think it works well.
So next one up here, New York Giants rookie wide receiver Malik Neighbors. I project him to face New Orleans Saints new perimeter cornerback Alontae Taylor. We've talked about Alontae Taylor before. He was manning the slot, but with Marshawn Lattimore out of the picture, Alontae Taylor has taken a 100% snap rate lined up on the defensive left. Meanwhile, rookie cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry is lined up at an 87.5% rate on the defensive right, while Ugo Amadi lines up in the slot. Worth noting here, Tyrann Mathieu injured his shoulder in week 13. He is expected to play, but when you were trying to contain monster big gain boy in Malik Neighbors, you want your best safety healthy, and he is not going to be healthy. So as for Neighbors, it's kind of the same thing as a lot of these guys. He lines up wide right at a 41.7% pre-snap alignment plurality rate, wide left 34.8, in the slot 22.2. So he's going to get a shot to exploit the friendly coverage of all three of these players, therefore ranking him among 32 NFL wide receivers with at least 360 receiving snaps, 18th in explosive pass plays, 14th in catch rate, 13th in missed tackles forced, 9th in yards per out run, and number 1 overall in target rate. His 81.9 PFF receiving grade ranks 6th. Meanwhile, New Orleans over the last 2 weeks, last 2 games, last 3 weeks, they had a bye in there. And this is, in the post Marshawn Lattimore world. New Orleans ranks 24th in explosive pass plays allowed to opposing wide receivers and 27th in yards allowed per coverage snap. Alontae Taylor specifically, among 62 NFL perimeter cornerbacks with at least 50 perimeter coverage snaps, Alontae Taylor ranks dead last in both yards allowed per coverage snap and explosive pass plays allowed rate. That is a Malik Neighbors stat if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, I love this. This is, again, I put Neighbors also in the wide receiver cornerback or wide receiver man zone report because he's been like a borderline wide receiver 2 almost every week since returning from injury. But this really stands out as like a potential wide receiver 1 week for him, right? He's due for that kind of performance here. He owns an elite 39% target rate versus man coverage, and he's top 15 in fantasy points per route run against man, which again, it should allow him at the very least a high-end wide receiver 2, but I think potentially top 12 wide receiver because the Saints do play man coverage at a top 10 rate, and they have allowed the 2nd most yards per reception, the most yards per coverage snap, and the 3rd most yards per coverage target when they're in man coverage. So yeah, this is a really nice week here for Monster Big Gain Boy. I don't know how that nickname doesn't stick at this point for Malik Neighbors.
All right, next one up here, Green Bay Packers, Christian Watson versus Detroit Lions, Terrion Arnold. I think this will be a lot of fun. Detroit's defense fairly banged up. This is kicking off this evening. They will be without, I think, 3 of their current starting defensive line or active defensive linemen, mm-hmm. 2 starters and 1 primary backup, 4 if you count Aiden Hutchinson. They've got a starting linebacker on injured reserve. They've also got, I think, starting safety on injured reserve. I got it in here. I don't know why I'm doing this off the top of my head. But anyway, this is a really banged up unit, and Jordan Love is very, very good throwing from a clean pocket. Among 33 NFL quarterbacks with at least 140 non-pressured dropbacks, Love ranks 10th in average depth of target, 9th in big-time throw rate, 7th in yards per pass play, and grades out as the 15th best player. We know Christian Watson, his one job is to just run downfield real fast. He also lines up between 30.1% and 35.9% across all 3 positions. So he's going to he'll face all of these guys, but Terrion Arnold will be his primary coverage foe. Arnold, among 66 perimeter and NFL perimeter cornerbacks with at least 200 perimeter coverage snaps. Arnold ranks 45th or worst in targeted rate, forced incompletion rate, yards allowed per coverage snap, and explosive pass plays allowed rate. Looking at Carlton Davis, he does grade out a little bit better, but he's allowed 10 explosive pass plays. That's a pretty decent number. And Amik Robertson, because of shifting personnel and whatnot, Robertson is taken. He's the primary slot coverage defender, not Brian Branch. He's earned a 52.9 PFF coverage grade thus far. Not very good. I think that Christian Watson, he basically is a threat to score against all 3 of these guys. Among 91 NFL wide receivers with at least 210 receiving snaps, Watson ranks 23rd in yards after catch per reception, 18th in yards per out run. That's 2.13. 8th in contested catch rate, and 2nd in both deep target rate and yards per reception. To me, this profiles as a Christian Watson type game.
Nice. I like it. Yeah, we'll talk about another Green Bay wide receiver here in a little bit, but I like the Christian Watson call. And I do have like just one other like start here. I actually went with because we'll lead into your pass and run funnel notes here as well, because I wanted to highlight Jonnu Smith as well from Miami, who he's been excellent. Obviously, he's kind of emerged as one of the more productive tight ends in the league this season, though that production really is greater under circumstances like this week's game potentially provides here, because the Dolphins offensive line, they've allowed just a 20% pressure rate. That's the third best mark in the league. The Jets own just a 66.6 pass rush grade this season. So they've been really kind of average there in the middle of the pack. But importantly for Jonnu Smith, on non-pressure dropbacks, he is seeing a very strong 26.4% target rate. That ranks 7th among 42 qualifying tight ends. And it leads all the Dolphins wide receivers as well. So Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle included. And then thanks to that high target rate, when Tua's kept clean, Smith has generated 0.52 fantasy points per route run in those situations. That ranks 6th among qualifying tight ends and also leads the Dolphins. So again, just kind of liking his spot here to be in, for another high end fantasy tight end finish this week. But yeah, what do you like about the Dolphins pass game matchup here going against the Jets?
Yeah. So I wrote up Jonnu Smith a couple times this summer, starting in May. And in July, I called him a tight end one breakout. And it took him, he had a slow start, which really irritated me, but he's making up for lost time. Yeah. Over the last 2 weeks, his 22 targets in weeks 12 and 13 tie for 5th among NFL, just everyone in the NFL. He's really killing it. He's facing the New York Jets, as you said. Among NFL teams, I also highlighted Devon Achane. I think he can really kill it here. But among NFL teams in weeks 9 through 13, New York's defense allows the fifth most yards per coverage snap to opposing tight ends, the 9th most yards per coverage snap to opposing running backs, and the 6th most yards per coverage snap to opposing wide receivers. I think all of these guys have a wonderful day. I fully expect Jonnu to crush it. I've got one team in a nice little underdog tournament here that I hadn't been tracking and noticed that Jonnu was in the lineup. So I'm pumped. Be nice to win some money, but let's go Jonnu.
Yeah, man, I like it. I think, yeah, top 5-ish play this week feels about right for Jonnu Smith. So I got a couple from the wide receiver man zone report as well that stood out. And the first one is actually Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars going against the Tennessee Titans, because obviously Thomas Jr., kind of the Jaguars' clear leader in fantasy points per route run against both man and zone coverage. But his high-end target rate versus man is what kind of provides me the most confidence in him delivering this week, even with a backup quarterback. And that target rate is 27.7%. The Titans play man and zone coverages at league average rates this season, but they rank 16th in yards allowed per coverage snap from man and are the best team in the league in that regard from zone. So they're definitely a defense to exploit when they're in man coverage, and that's where Brian Thomas Jr. stands out the most. I like him as a potential top 24 wide receiver this week. Garrett Wilson also stood out because it feels like he's another one that's kind of due for a big game here. Should be in line for one this week against one of the league's worst zone coverage units in Miami. So Wilson leads the Jets in fantasy success and target rate, 24% versus zone coverages this season. Dolphins are another team, though. They play man and zone at about league average rates, but they rank 31st in team coverage grade while they're in zone. They rank 19th in that regard from man. So they're going to play more zone than man. That's just every team does. So this is an area where Garrett Wilson can exploit them, and a potential top 20 play this week. George Pickens, Pittsburgh Steelers going against the Cleveland Browns. So Pickens ranks 17th in fantasy points per route run versus man coverage. He's the only Steelers wide receiver who's run at least 30 routes to crack the top 80 in that regard. He has a 31% target rate. That's by far the best on the team against man coverage, and it just makes him kind of the clear best bet to deliver in week 14 as a wide receiver one, I think, going against the Browns, who play man coverage at a top 5 rate, and they rank 20th in yards allowed per coverage target and 23rd in yards allowed from per reception from man coverage. And then the last name here leading into your pass run funnel report as well, Nick. I put Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills going against the Los Angeles Rams. So we talked about Shakir last week. It didn't work out. It ended up being a snow game, so that really kind of threw a wrench into things here. So I'm coming back to Khalil Shakir because I like the matchup here going against the Rams a lot better. Owns one of by far the best target rate versus zone coverage among Bills wide receivers. And I will tell you exactly what that is because I left it out of my notes. It is a 29.5% target rate against zone coverage. As a result, he ranks in the top 15 wide receivers among 131 qualifiers in fantasy points per route run versus zone. The Rams play zone coverage at a top 5 rate. They rank 25th in defensive success rate, and they are in the bottom 6 in yards allowed per reception, yards allowed per coverage snap, yards allowed per coverage target, and first down plus touchdown rate when they're in zone. So like Khalil Shakir as kind of that fringe wide receiver 2 potential flex play this week against the Rams.
Yeah, what stood out to me looking at the Rams pass defense was they're really committed to jumping routes. They do a good job of forcing incompletions and securing interception, but that commitment lends itself to big time gains for the offense when the route jumping does not work out. The unit ranks 20th in yards allowed per coverage snap over the last weeks 9 through 13. Unit ranks 20th in yards allowed per coverage snap, 26th in explosive pass plays allowed rate. I think Khalil Shakir, who we talked about last week, basically the best post-catch producer at the slot position in the NFL. His missed tackles forced, his yards after the catch per reception. I think his yak he's like averaging double digits. Like it was like 11 yards or something obscene. Leads the league in missed tackles forced among slot receivers. So I think his talent profile is like perfect for this. He gets the ball. If the defensive back is getting behind him voluntarily, he is gone. I also highlighted the run funnel aspect here. Buffalo, what they're doing really, really well is playing through contact. So looking at the offense as a whole, ranks and or ties for 13th among NFL rushing offenses in weeks 9 through 13 in both missed tackles and missed tackles forced per rushing attempt. They're shedding defenders both voluminously and efficiently. The Rams, for their part, they are making contact fairly early, but they rank 6th in. No, getting all tongue-tied here. The offensive line ranks 6th in yards after contact per rushing. I'm screwing that up. But anyway, the Rams run defense, they're missing a lot of tackles and they're allowing yards after contact. The Bills rushing offense, all 4 members are breaking tackles effectively. Ray Davis is a guy that I chose to highlight here. Second most rushing attempts in week 13 last week. Now, it was a snow game, as you mentioned, but he came out of the bye, played very well, ran the ball 11 times, 28.9% team rushing attempt share. I think that given the bye weeks, Ray Davis could be started as like a desperation flex play here. The process is there for him. He's a great tackle breaker. The matchup is set nicely for him. So I get so tongue-tied there. It totally threw me off. But I like Ray Davis a lot in this matchup. And Khalil Shakir. Moving on to greener pastures with easier to say names. Time for the wide receiver sits. Carolina Panthers rookie wide receiver Xavier Legette facing Philadelphia Eagles cornerback Isaiah Rodgers. The Eagles have the best secondary in football, or at least the best cornerback core in football. And I don't know if folks have realized this yet. So we've talked a lot about, we've been talking about Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean while people have been rolling their eyes at these rookies for months. So props to us. But in the other cornerback position, they've got Darius Slay, who is currently injured. We'll see if he's able to return. But if not, no worries. Philadelphia scooped up former Colts cornerback Isaiah Rodgers, who had a knee injury, a gambling suspension for a whole dang season. He broke his finger, I think, or his hand in training camp this season. Doesn't matter. He's absolutely killing it. Among 78 NFL perimeter cornerbacks, at least 145 perimeter coverage snaps. Rodgers ranks 9th in catch rate allowed, 2nd in yards allowed per coverage snap, third in explosive pass plays allowed rate. He's very quietly, his breakout is being overshadowed by the other two guys who are totally kicking butt. Xavier Legette not only has a difficult in-house matchup, meaning Jalen Coker and Jatavion Sanders could return, and Jonathan Brooks is now flashing as a pass catcher. He's got increased target volume. He also is just such a terribly volatile player. So I've categorized him in this one as a highly volatile wide receiver 4 or 5. He could foot race this guy to the end zone, but among 67 NFL wide receivers with at least 260 receiving snaps, Xavier Legette ranks 60th in PFF receiving grade, 41st in target rate, 48th in yards per run, 34th in catch rate, and 62nd in yards after catch per reception. His profile is fun. It's a big play thing, but on a play-to-play basis, he's just not very efficient, and I think Isaiah Rodgers quickly will become a household name here by the end of the year, and I think he does a good job keeping him in check.
Nice. I like it. Yeah. The Eagles, I mean, you highlighted their defense, but I mean, yeah, their pass coverage has been excellent. They play man coverage at an above average rate this season, and they rank top 5 in yards allowed per coverage snap, yards allowed per coverage target, explosive play rate allowed. Like, they're really, really good. Xavier Legette, he has found more success against man than zone this season. But like you said, Jalen Coker is coming back this week, it seems like. And again, it's just a tougher matchup all around. So I'm with you. I'm not necessarily trusting Legette this week.
Cool. Next one up, Arizona Cardinals, number 2 wide receiver, Michael Wilson, facing the Seattle Seahawks cornerback Devin Witherspoon. So Witherspoon in two wide receiver sets, he handles number 2 duties on the perimeter. But when the offense kicks into 3 wide receiver sets, he moves inside to the slot. Michael Wilson kind of does a little bit of both. He lines up on the outside. He also kicks inside of the slot at a 29.4% rate. Last time these two teams faced each other in week 12, Witherspoon did operate as Wilson's primary coverage foe. I believe it was on a plurality of snaps. It was 12 snaps total. But I think that just that dynamic, it really sucks for Michael Wilson because he's going to just have to deal with perhaps the best coverage defender. Probably Tariq Woolen. But anyway, Seattle's pass defense has played very well since its week 10 bye. I think that they're taking to the Mike McDonald scheme. They are blitzing a lot to mildly effective results, which could be a problem for Kyler Murray. Murray's 5.2% turnover-worthy play rate when blitzed and his 7.5% turnover-worthy play rate when pressured, rank 3rd highest. Both of them rank 3rd highest among 34 NFL quarterbacks with at least 60 blitz drop backs and 34 NFL quarterbacks with at least 75 pressured drop backs. As for the pass defense as a whole and the coverage aspects since the week 10 bye, Seattle ranks number 1 overall in EPA allowed per play, and the wide receiver coverage unit ranks 4th in yards allowed per coverage snap and 2nd in explosive pass plays allowed rate. Devin Witherspoon doing a very good job breaking up passes, 17th in forced incompletion rate, 12.5%, 15th in explosive pass plays allowed rate, 1.7%. And he ranks 7th in open target rate. He is sticking to these guys like glue. Michael Wilson, meanwhile, among 67 NFL wide receivers with at least 260 receiving snaps, ranks outside the top 45 in target rate, missed tackles forced, yards after catch per reception, and explosive pass plays. I do not expect that to change this week.
I like it. And then the last name on the list here, you went with Juju Smith-Schuster of the Kansas City Chiefs. He is facing Jasir Taylor of the Los Angeles Chargers, so not a fan of this matchup.
Yeah, Derwin James chips in for the team's slot coverage, but Jasir Taylor is like, I think he's making a case for one of the probably 5 to 8, probably top 5 in slot coverage defense. Among 32 NFL slot defensive backs with at least 160 slot coverage snaps, Taylor ranks 8th in explosive pass plays allowed, 4th in yards allowed per coverage snap, 2nd in forced incompletion rate, and number 1 overall in targeted rate, being targeted on just 11.2% of his slot coverage snaps. Meanwhile, Juju Smith-Schuster, I don't think a lot of people would have been considering him last week, but given the bye weeks, everybody's trying to find someone. And I get it if you want to just pick a wide receiver who is starting in the Kansas City offense, but he has really been quiet since that big, week 6 showing. Yeah, ties for 87th. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Ties for 87th in yards per out run, ranks outside the top 110 in targeted rate and average up the target. It's just a real bummer of a situation here. I also think that Kansas City, they'll do their thing with Patrick Mahomes because he's Patrick Mahomes, but Los Angeles run defense, not so good. I think that this could kind of be a coming out party for Isaiah Pacheco. He ran well last week, and he basically just, I've got all of the data in here, but he basically just straight up outperformed Kareem Hunt. Averaged 6.3 yards per attempt, 1.9 yards after contact. Kareem Hunt, meanwhile, 2.1 yards per carry, 1.1 yards after contact. He did have to. He's got an uphill battle with some of the passing down stuff, but they did promisingly keep him in there for one of the 7 green zone snaps. I think Pacheco, even if he's on a limited workload here, he can kind of get the job done against Los Angeles, who ranks 18th in average depth of tackle, 19th in explosive run plays allowed rate, 25th in yards allowed after contact, and 29th in EPA allowed per run defense play. They tie for the 6th most run defense tackles in weeks 9 through 13. So I think a run-heavy approach here might be in order. They also opened as 4-point home favorites. Road favorites? Home favorites? Something favorites.
The Chargers are on the road this week in Kansas City. There you go.
Home favorites.
Yeah, I love it. I did add a couple sits here. So one of them is Quentin Johnston of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Quentin Johnston, he's had his weeks where he's been fantasy relevant. And again, we expect the Chargers passing offense to bounce back here after a couple down performances these past 2 weeks. So he could still find himself, I think, as the odd man out in this situation. It's also possible that Ladd McConkey could miss this game as he deals with an injury that took him out of the team's Week 13 game. That would obviously help Johnston's value. But for now, he doesn't really project strongly in this matchup. I was looking at the offensive line and defensive line matchup here. Chargers offensive line, they rank kind of just middle of the pack in pass blocking grade this season, but the Chiefs defensive line ranks 5th in pass rush grade and are generating a 27.9% quick pressure rate. That's the 3rd best mark in the league. And then you look at Quentin Johnston on pressure dropbacks this season, he is seeing just a 4.7% target rate. That ranks 155th out of 157 qualifying wide receivers and tight ends. This is a huge difference from his 26.8% target rate on non-pressure dropbacks. So both Ladd McConkey and Will Dissly rank among the top 12 in target rate among that kind of same cohort on pressure dropbacks. And then as a result, Johnston ranks just 88th in fantasy points per route run on pressure dropbacks. So he is a definite avoid for me this week. If Ladd McConkey can't go, obviously feel a bit better about him, but still really not trusting him. I have him as more kind of a wide receiver 4-5 this week, even in a week where we don't have a lot of options. And then, so again, like I said, it's kind of a weird week for sits, not just because like it's difficult to recommend players to avoid with so many on a bye week, but looking at the wide receiver man zone report this week, there's not a ton of obvious standouts to avoid, which is a good thing for us when we have limited options. But like, for example, DJ Moore has he's been poor against man all season, but then last week actually ended up having a great game against the Detroit Lions, who are the most man heavy defense in the league, and a good one. So, once you kind of factor that in with that most recent sample, it's kind of clear that he can at least have some success there. And then even players who have maybe struggled against certain coverage types this year, they're facing teams that are pretty poor in those coverage types. So it provides at least a chance for some of these kind of overall talented players to overcome their past and deliver this week, because the teams they're facing suck, for lack of a better word. So again, it's great for us for fantasy for this week, because we're likely going to have no choice but to start a lot of these guys anyways. But all that being said, there was only really one standout for a tougher matchup among all the actual players kind of worth considering. And it was Jayden Reed going against the Detroit Lions tonight. So we'll find out pretty quickly, obviously. But Jayden Reed ranks outside the top 75 wide receivers who have run at least 30 routes in fantasy points per route run versus man coverage. And he is doing so with a lower target rate at 19% than he is versus zone. So I'm tempering expectations just because the Lions, again, they play man coverage at the highest rate in the NFL, and they rank in the top 5 in first down plus touchdown rate allowed and defensive success rate from those looks. So Jayden Reed, just more of like a wide receiver 3 for me this week. All right, we will move on to the other positions, but first I want to give a shout out to Fabric by Gerber Life. As parents, we do everything we can to set up our kids for successful future, academics, team sport, about starting actually when they're out on their own. Fabric makes it easy for you to set up an investment account for your child now that grows with them and helps prepare for their financial future. Funds can be used for nearly anything benefiting your child, from tuition and books to summer camps and after-school activities. And when they're adults, they can use their funds for their first home, new car, or even to start a business. It's all online, and setting up an account could take you just 5 minutes. Get started investing with as little as $1 a day, then manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. There are no contribution limits, multiple tax advantages, and they're SIPC insured up to $500,000, plus no commission fees and just a low flat monthly maintenance fee. You could share your child's unique gifting link with family and friends. So instead of gifting them things they'll outgrow for birthdays and special occasions, they can help grow your child's investments instead. Fabric has partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families like yours for over 50 years. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy, MEET fabric.com/fantasy. This is a paid promotion for the Fabric UGMA product and not for investment advisory services. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Custodial services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Terms apply. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, Nick, let's talk about some running backs here. And I feel like one of the more interesting running backs for this week is Isaac Guerendo of the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, we know that Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason landed on injured reserve. They are done for the fantasy season. So Guerendo is in a great position to kind of take over the lead back duties this week. And he's doing so in a favorable matchup here in week 14 against the Chicago Bears. So the 49ers offensive line has generated 1.7 rushing yards before contact per attempt. That ranks as the 3rd best mark in the league. The Bears defensive line has allowed 1.4 rushing yards per contact per attempt. That ranks 24th. And then when you look at Guerendo, when he's given at least 1 rushing yard before contact, he's averaging 9.0 yards per carry. That leads all running backs with at least 20 carries in those situations. So it's not like, there's not like a ton of stuff to talk about here, because it's kind of just a clear option, at least a clear starting option. Like for teams that have recently acquired Guerendo off waivers, he should immediately be in a position to start and return some fantasy value in a week where, again, there are 6 teams on a bye. The Bears are allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game to running backs this season. So I like Guerendo as kind of like a high-end RB2. How do you feel about him coming off waivers here?
Yeah, I agree. Chicago 23rd in EPA allowed per run play, and I had the before contact stuff here, and then 24th in yards allowed before contact. He's going to get a huge workload. We've seen how Kyle Shanahan, he freaks out when his guys are not there, and he just only trusts the next guy up. I think Patrick Taylor and Izzy Abanikanda could be stashed if so inclined. But yeah, Isaac Guerendo, I think he's a pretty safe bet for like 16 carries or more, and it's a winnable matchup.
Nice. And then I also highlighted a name from Nate's Start Sit article. So, and shout out to Nate. He switched up the Start Sit format that this week. Basically took some names from the PFF Fantasy Discord channel and grabbed some of the kind of more interesting names that people were thinking about as potential starters this week, and then wrote them all up for each position, ranked them, and then added a list of players who he would start them over and who he would sit them against, and things like that. So it's a nice change here, and definitely I think a format that works for this kind of thing, because like Nate points out in the article, not every player is a universal start or sit. So Tony Pollard was the name that I pulled from the list here, because as Nate writes, he has been inconsistent in recent weeks. Across his first 8 games, he handled at least 16 carries 7 times. But over the past 5 weeks, he has 2 games with 24 or more carries in the Titans' wins. And he has 8 to 9 carries in their past 3 losses. So he's consistently caught 2 to 4 passes per game this season. His recent wins in Tennessee have also coincided with Tyjae Spears missing time, and the losses have coincided with Spears playing with him back in the lineup. So Pollard plays at least 80% of snaps when Spears doesn't play, 60 to 67% when he does. And yeah, Nate also points out that Pollard did play 73% last week with Spears back in the lineup, and he is expected back again this week. But the Titans are at home. They're against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who obviously won't have Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. Tennessee is a 3.5-point favorite. The Jaguars have allowed the second most fantasy points to running backs this season. The game script, the Jaguars' run defense, make this a nice matchup here for Tony Pollard. So Nate mentions that he might only be an RB2 this week in like 10 to 12 team leagues, but he should be at least considered a high-end RB2 and have a better game than most of his kind of recent performances. So he should be starting, he says, unless your team is completely stacked at running back.
Yep, I agree. I think they're just going to call upon him to kill the clock. Like we said earlier, the Jags pass defense is a lot softer than the run defense, but I think volume play should be reasonable here. And he looks a lot better than he did last year after the tightrope procedure.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Okay, so I did include one sit this week. Again, I didn't want to go too heavy on the sits here because we, again, don't really have a lot of options. But I put Breece Hall of the New York Jets. And again, this is maybe a borderline sit because he's probably more like a low-end RB2 for me this week in this matchup against Miami. So the Jets offensive line is generating 0.9 rushing yards before contact per attempt. That ranks 30th, while Miami's defensive line is allowing just 0.5 rushing yards before contact per attempt. That is the best mark in the league. And then you look at Breece Hall, when he's contacted 2 or fewer yards from the line of scrimmage, he's averaging just 2.5 yards per carry. That ranks 33rd among 51 qualifying running backs. He also has a 52.0 rushing grade in those situations. That ranks 39th among the same qualifying running backs. He is dealing with an injury as well. He ceded some snaps and playing time to Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen this past week as a result. So considering the Jets' current record and kind of the trajectory of their season, like it wouldn't be surprising to see them rely on Hall less and maybe allow a little bit more work for his backups to provide some relief. So you combine that with the poor matchup where the Jets backs rank 20th of 26 teams this week in the PFF strength of schedule tool. I'm not considering him a top running back option this week.
Yeah, he also did not practice this morning, or he was not seen practicing about an hour ago. So he might not even play. If he's like an LP tomorrow and then questionable, that's going to be a nightmare. But I think that we're on the same page here, that this is why would they play him?
Yeah, it just feels like, it's if he's banged up this much, because it was the same thing last week, right? He was basically barely practiced all week, and then he was ended up playing, but like just wasn't as effective. They didn't use him as much, so just feels like, why risk it, right? Like there's no point. So I don't know.
Agree.
All right, let's close her out here. Well, close to anyways. But we got a couple like waiver wire type players again to kind of discuss here, Nick. And the first one is Nick Touchdown Akine. The guy just can't stop finding his way into the end zone. It's actually insane. So what are your thoughts here on Akine coming out as a potential waiver target?
So the thing that I want to highlight is not the touchdowns. It's that over the last 4 weeks, he's averaging 1.88 yards per out run, which is fine. It's not elite, but that does suggest he is capable of holding this number 2 wide receiver role. Like 188, how would you categorize that? A C plus, B minus? Like I mean, I guess you wouldn't grade Jamar Chase in the same manner, but like this is 1.88 is pretty darn solid. 8.6 yards after the catch per reception, 16-yard average depth of target. We've already talked about how much we like this matchup for Will Levis, for Calvin Ridley. I'm heartened by this. What I expected was for him to be at like 1.3. So when I saw the 1.88 over the last couple of weeks, that made me go, okay, he is playing well right now. I don't think that he's like going to have a breakout over his career best dating back to 2020 was 1.37. So he is playing above his level, but that's fine. He is doing it. And now he gets to face the worst pass defense in the NFL. I think that you can start Nick Westbrook-Ikhine as a admittedly volatile wide receiver 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's about where I have him as well, in that kind of wide receiver 3 range. And the nice thing, like we talked about him on the waiver wire show, like the touchdowns, obviously those are a nice bonus here. He's doing it at an unstable rate, so they're going to come down at some point. But the nice thing was that last week he saw 7 targets, right? So that was a season high for him. So again, if those targets start to come here, like you said, and being efficient on those targets with that 1.88 yards per route run, like there's definitely at least a better floor for him instead of being like overly boom bust. So yeah, I like him as a potential wide receiver 3 in a week like this. Go ahead. Yeah, you got the next name here. We alluded to him at the top
right,
here.
So, yeah, shout out to RotoPat, who has been making jokes about Sincere McCormick being an excellent Lifetime movie title. It's like the 46-year-old Irish bachelor. So Sincere McCormick. He last week with Alexander Mattison and Zamir White doing nothing, which that doesn't actually tell you if they were active or not, because it's just what those two guys do on a weekly basis.
Right.
Sincere McCormick ran the ball 12 times, forced 3 missed tackles. That's good. 0.25 per attempt, average 5.3 yards per carry, 3.6 yards after contact, and he's ripped off 2 explosive run plays in each of the last 2 weeks. Caught 2 of 2 passes for 1 yard. He's not very good there, but he can go do the job, maybe catch a couple checkdowns. Sincere. So Sincere's facing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who we highlighted earlier. If both Alexander Mattison and Zamir White are out, I think that you can start Sincere McCormick as like an RB2 if you have just nothing else there. But understand he could total like 16 yards and that's all you're getting. But he did run well. And I'm not worried about Zamir. Zamir's like not practicing, so I don't think he's going to play.
Right.
Alexander Mattison, as of yesterday, I think he's logged 4 limited practices in a row. So like it's good that he was limited on Wednesday for his availability, but also it's not his status is not changing. So that's not good. Mm-hmm. My concern with Alexander Mattison and Amir Abdullah being active is just that the touches might not be there for McCormick to, turn in a usable fantasy day. But I do not consider either of those guys talent threats to this formerly productive college player. They really should give McCormick more opportunities. He's 24 years old, 5'9", 205 pounds. If you, geez, okay, here's one that neither of us want to answer. If Breece Hall confirmed DNP today, he goes limited Friday, and he's questionable. There's a game time decision, and they make him active, but you get some Jay Glazer thing saying, but he's going to be limited, and Braylon Allen is expected to be heavily involved. Do you start Sincere McCormick or Breece Hall?
Oh God, that's gross. Yeah, I mean, if Alexander Mattison is out, let's assume Zamir White's going to be out. If Alexander Mattison is out, oh God, I don't know, man. I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I could pull the trigger on that one. It's just, you know what it is? It's like you said, he ran well last week. He's not involved in the passing game. That's going to belong to Amir Abdullah pretty much every time, right? I do think Tampa Bay should win this game easily, but I mean, the Raiders played well against the Chiefs last week, right? There was a close game. Maybe they probably even should have won if it wasn't for the Chiefs' black magic there. But like, I guess there's a chance it could be a close game and that he gets his touches, right? Oh God. I have him as more of kind of a like in the RB3 range, and I still am treating Breece Hall as like the RB2.
Yeah. I think that starting Breece is the right thing to do, but I think that that's where we are with Breece and Sincere. Let's wrap this thing up. Let's bring it home here. Unless you had it, did you want to add any more?
No, that's good. Now I'm going to be thinking about that until we see the games. So that's a tough one. Go ahead.
DST streamers of the week. Got the Tennessee Titans versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jaguars finally decided to put Trevor Lawrence on injured reserve. Mm-hmm. I think it was really gross that they let him play last week. That's just my personal opinion. You could see that this guy had suffered a grade 3 AC joint sprain, which means that his clavicle had fully detached from his shoulder. He entered the game with this, and I put this in the article, in the defense streamer article. You can go look at it. The photos of him, even wearing a sweatshirt, his left shoulder is like 1.5 inches higher than his right. It's nasty, and it's really irresponsible that they let him go out there. All that's going to happen is he's going to fall on it, and it's going to get more messed up. But like, what are you? You're like 2-10 or whatever. Why are you putting your franchise? Why are you putting anyone out there when their clavicle is detached from their body? That's so stupid. Anyway, so then he got a brain injury. Great. And now he's out for the year, and he's going to have season-ending surgery on that to friggin' tie down the clavicle. So they're uncorking McCorkle Jones as the rest of season starter. Among 42 NFL quarterbacks with at least 100 dropbacks, Jones ranks 34th in completion rate, 39th in yards per passing attempt, 40th in turnover-worthy play rate, grading out as the 4th worst passer. Among 50 NFL quarterbacks with at least 10 pressured dropbacks, Mac Jones ties for 29th in pressure to sack rate. Tennessee, their defense is fine. Their secondary is playing decently well despite the injuries. They have a couple substantial ones in there. The defense here will succeed via the scheme, not necessarily the players. It's sort of a weird group of players. They're kind of underperforming, but they're blitzing. They're just going to create problems for McCorkle. So fire them up as a DST streamer. Philadelphia Eagles versus the Carolina Panthers is the other one here. We've already talked at length about how good the cornerback core is. Shout out to Bryce Young. My man's playing well. Not my man. I've always been kind of a doubter, but he's playing well. But they cannot. The Eagles defense is just so friggin' good. So Cooper DeJean entered the lineup as a starter in week 6. Since then, Philadelphia ranks 2nd in EPA allowed per pass play, second in both EPA allowed per play and forced incompletion rate, 6th in quarterback pressure rate, 4th in defensive success rate, number 1 overall in yards allowed per coverage time, explosive pass plays allowed rate, and pass rush win rate. They are the highest graded defense during that stretch. I'm giving all of the credit to Cooper DeJean. Not really, but they're playing so friggin' well, and DeJean is like amazing. He should be in the running for Defensive Player of the Year, as should Quinion Mitchell. But as for the run defense, during that stretch where Cooper DeJean is just making tackles on the inside, the defense ranks second. Run defense ranks 2nd in EPA allowed per play, 9th in average depth of tackle. Meanwhile, Carolina's rushing offense, over the last 5 weeks ranks 14th in EPA per play. Which is pretty decent, but this one should just be sort of a steamrolling affair.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I like the Eagles defense this week. I picked them up in a couple places to plug them in. And I mean, yeah, shout out to Cooper DeJean, man. That open field tackle on Derrick Henry was pretty awesome last week. That was nuts.
I am giving him credit for the whole turnaround. Yes, that was awesome. He airlifted him. That
was crazy, man. So yeah, good stuff there. But that'll wrap us up for today. Thank you all again very much for tuning in. As always, if you enjoyed the show, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, or leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us a ton. Nick, huge thank you to you as well for doing this with me every week. And before you go, please do remind everybody what you have up on pff.com this week.
Tuesdays, quarterback defense streamers of the week. Wednesdays, pass run funnel report. Thursdays, wide receiver cornerback matchups to target and avoid.
Very nice. Yep, I got the wide receiver man zone coverage report that is out now. O-line, D-line matchup article will be out on Friday morning. We got the IDP rankings, the IDP fantasy report. Those are out as well. And then you could, of course, check out Nate's rankings, his start sit article, the recap articles, all that stuff over on PFF.com. So good luck to everyone in week 14 and getting into the fantasy playoffs, because we hope to see you all again next week. But until then, peace out.